Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeff Selesky, the Vice Provost for Research on the Bloomington campus. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the 2022 Distinguished Faculty Research Lecture, which will be delivered by Herman B. Wells, Endowed Professor of Psychological and Brain Sciences, Professor Mary Murphy. I'd like to start by thanking the OVPR Advisory Committee, who actually had the difficult task of choosing the winner of this year's award from a wide range of very worthy applicants. Today's lecture continues a great campus tradition in Bloomington that began in 1980 as a way to highlight outstanding work of faculty whose research has significantly expanded the frontiers of knowledge in their given fields. On a campus where research excellence is an expectation, the Distinguished Faculty Research Lecture honors an individual whose research accomplishments and impact are truly extraordinary. Over the years, the lectures in this series have highlighted a remarkable diversity of research and creative activity on our campus. Past lecturers have included intellectual giants from IU Bloomington, which include the late Elinor Ostrom, our most recent Nobel laureate, Distinguished Professor of Sociology and member of the National Academy of Medicine and National Academy of Sciences, Bernice Pescosolido, whose work in mental health, stigma, and suicide have generated national and international acclaim, as well as Distinguished Professor and AAAS Fellow Mike Wade, whose research in biology and evolutionary biology has served to build one of IU's premier graduate programs in that area. The Distinguished Faculty Research Lecture has been an extraordinary series for the Bloomington campus. In recent years, we've celebrated lectures on topics ranging from greenhouse gases in the Arctic, to exotic particles in quarks, to language development in human infants, marriage equality, and wind energy, just to name a few of the topics. At first glance, the individual lectures in this very eclectic series seem to have very little in common with one another. Yet they share a very consistent trait. That is that the individuals who delivered these lectures have all made substantial contributions to the expansion of knowledge in their respective fields and have dedicated their formidable talents to research of great importance in our world. These lectures embody the core mission of Indiana University to create, preserve, and disseminate knowledge for the betterment of all of us. They all are shining examples of our faculty here in Bloomington acting as forces for good in the world. The Distinguished Faculty Research Lecture offers our campus community, all of you here with us today and all of you online, an opportunity to engage with the research and ideas of a colleague whose work reverberates far beyond the IU Bloomington campus. Professor Murphy, congratulations on being named the 2022 Distinguished Faculty Research Lecturer. We all look forward to hearing about your research today and continued supporting the great work you do. With that, I would like to invite Provost and Executive Vice President Raul Shrivastov to the podium to say a little bit more about today's honoree. Provost.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. I'm delighted to be here for the 2022 Distinguished Faculty Research Lecture. As I've mentioned at faculty-related events recently, and I cannot mention it enough, a distinct pleasure of joining IU Bloomington in my new capacity has been getting to know the varied and impactful research that our faculty have been engaged in. Some of the best, most innovative, and most creative minds in the world thrive on this campus. And today I'm pleased to say that we get to hear from one of them. Dr. Mary Murphy is the Herman B. Wells Endowed Professor of Psychological and Brain Sciences. She's the founder of IU's Equity Accelerator, a research, practice, and policy organization that focuses on creating more equitable learning and working environments through social and behavioral science. Within the realm of education, Dr. Murphy's research illuminates situational cues like faculty and institutional mindset, which influence students' academic motivation and achievement. She focuses on understanding when those processes are similar and different for structurally advantaged and disadvantaged students. Dr. Murphy further develops, implements, and evaluates social psychological interventions that reduce identity threat and spur students' motivation, persistence, and performance. Within the realm of organizations and technology, Dr. Murphy's research examines barriers and solutions for building gender and racial diversity and inclusion in STEM-related fields. Dr. Murphy holds a PhD from Stanford University. She joined our faculty in 2012 and in 2013 was named a Rising Star by the Association for Psychological Science. She is the recipient of the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, as well as the recipient of over $9 million in federal and foundational grants, including a recent $2.2 million NSF Career Award for her research on strategies to improve diversity in STEM. If you're feeling that that name is familiar, it probably is. Her research has been profiled in the New York Times, Forbes, Harvard Business Review, Scientific American, and NPR, amongst other outlets. Dr. Murphy's new book on organizational mindset, Cultures of Growth, is set to be published by Simon & Schuster in 2023. Dr. Murphy's lecture today is titled Faculty as Culture Creators, the Role of Faculty Mindset in Student Success. Please join me in welcoming to the podium, Dr. Mary Murphy.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I want to thank you, Provost Srivastav and Vice Provost Zaleski for that warm introduction and this incredible honor. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank everyone who's joining in on the live stream. I know there's about 70 people registered for the live stream, so welcome to you as well. I want to extend my personal thanks to David Taylor, who worked incredibly hard to organize this event, as well as Elena Gracia, as well as Alicia Kozma and their team here at the IU Cinema, who's hosting us today. So thank you all very, very much. Yes, let's give them a round of applause. So today I am thrilled to share the work of my students, my collaborators, and myself. We've all been doing this work for about the last 10 years or so we're gonna get right into it, talking about faculty, and I will remove this actually. There we go. Faculty as culture creators, and talking about the role of faculty mindset in student success. So I want to get started with a quote that really has guided my research over the last 10 years, 15 years actually or so. This is from my former advisor, Claude Steele, who said in 1997, "From an observer's standpoint, the situations of a boy and a girl in a math class or of a Black student and a white student in any class are essentially the same. The teacher is the same, the textbooks are the same, and in better classrooms, these students are treated the same. Is it possible then that they should still experience the classroom differently? So differently, in fact, as to significantly affect their performance and achievement there? This is the central question. And it is a central question that's guided our work, my students' work, my postdocs' work, and my work across the years. And one of the factors that differs in terms of people's experience in these classrooms is that of mindset. Mindset was originally created by Professor Carol Dweck here. And many people have heard of mindset, especially if you've been operating in K-12 settings. Mindset is something that's often talked about. And when it comes to mindset, it's often talked about this as a dichotomous feature, right? A growth mindset is the belief that intelligence and ability is something that can be developed. People with a growth mindset understand that abilities are things that can be expanded, they're potentials through hard work, effective strategies, and help from others. And this is often contrasted with the fixed mindset that holds that beliefs about intelligence are relatively fixed. You can't really change them. You either have it or you don't. You're a math person or you're a creative person, and that's just who you are. Now, if you Google mindset, you're going to see something like this. Oftentimes two heads mindset exists inside the head, according to this perspective. And everything about the mindset is here underneath the heads. And so you can see, you can tell which one is the right one to have, right? And you can tell which one is the one that you kind of want to stay away from, right? If I can learn anything I want to in the growth mindset, in the fixed mindset, I'm either good at it or I'm not. When I fail, I'm no good. If you succeed, I will feel threatened, right? That's the fixed mindset at work. I can learn anything I want to. When I fail, I learn. If you succeed, I become inspired rather than threatened. Now, I call this the old way of thinking about mindset, mindset 1.0. And there are a few reasons for it. One, it only thinks about mindset as a characteristic inside our minds. What's your mindset? What's my mindset? And how does it affect us? But also, it sort of creates this false dichotomy, right? You either have the fixed mindset or you have the growth mindset. And as we started to work with K-12 teachers and then college faculty, it became more and more clear that teachers were starting to apply mindset to students. And it became yet another label in which teachers would come to us and say, well, that kid just has a fixed mindset. There's nothing I can do about it. And you can see how ironic that is, right? Right, the fixed mindset and the growth mindset within kids used then as a label. So what's a better way to think about this? This is what I call kind of mindset 2.0. To realize that we all have both the fixed mindset and the growth mindset within us. And we move between our mindsets based on situational cues in the local moment, based on if this is an evaluative situation, or if it's in a high effort situation, or if someone else is succeeding and I might compare myself to them. This is where we find people kind of moving between their fixed and their growth mindset. And so this is a better way to think about mindset. It's also, by the way, the way that research is actually conducted on mindset. We measure mindset on a continuum. And we know from many studies that when people read an article about intelligence and ability being relatively fixed, not changeable very much over the lifespan, it will move people towards their fixed mindset. And if they read another scientific article that actually intelligence and ability are things that are potentials that can be expanded, it moves people towards their growth mindset. So again, we all have both mindsets and we move between them based on local situations and cues in those environments. But I'm going to tell you mostly today about a third move that we made about 10 years ago in an original article in 2010 when we started thinking about this. Now we're thinking about mindset, not just as a characteristic inside your head or inside my head, what do you believe or what I believe, but now thinking about mindset as a cultural variable that exists inside institutions, inside our teams, inside departments at a university. And that's this idea of mindset culture. So what do I mean when I talk about mindset culture? I'm talking about the beliefs of powerful people. In a classroom, that might be a teacher or a professor. In a university, it might be the provost and his team, executive team. In a workplace setting, it might be supervisors or bosses. What do we believe about students' talents and abilities? And again, just as at an individual level, mindset moves, right, between the fixed and the growth mindset, so too does mindset culture. And mindset culture, how do we know we're in a fixed or growth mindset culture? Well, we would look at the artifacts of that culture. So we would look at how mindset is expressed through what instructors in a classroom, for example, say and do. What are our norms, our policies, our practices, and our interactions with students? So let me give you some examples. Right before COVID, my students and I visited over 65 introductory STEM courses here on this campus. And we videotaped faculty with their permission as they were teaching their courses. And we wanted to see how mindset might be communicated to their students through what they were saying and doing and their policies and practices across the term. And so, I'm taking some of these examples from those videos where faculty really communicated the culture of their classrooms. So we recorded 65 faculty. Still, we had about 5 faculty say things like, look to your left, look to your right. Only one of you is going to be here at the end of the term, right? Or listen, if you're not a science person, you should really consider dropping this course. We think that these kinds of messages communicate more of a fixed mindset culture, and they cause students to worry and wonder whether I or people like me belong here in this class? Am I one of those that's going to last till the end of the term? Do I have what it takes to be a quote unquote science person? Whereas other faculty say things like this at the beginning of the term. Listen, this course is going to build on previous material from a previous class. If you need to review those concepts, we can connect you to the resources to do so, suggesting that that material is learnable and that we're going to help you learn that previous work. Alternatively, faculty can say things like, listen, it's going to be normal to be challenged by material at some point in the term. And when that happens, reach out for help. I'm here to help you understand your challenges and your mistakes. We think this communicates to students the message that all students, regardless of their background, regardless of their entering level of ability, can learn and grow in this particular course. So how might instructors' mindsets influence students' experiences and their performance in class? We think there's at least a couple of hypotheses here. First, we might see just a benefit of growth mindset culture for all students. This hypothesis comes from 35 years of mindset research at the individual level. That'd be hard-pressed to find where the growth mindset doesn't show positive benefits relative to the fixed mindset. So in this case, when faculty communicate more of a growth mindset culture, we might expect that all students' performance and motivation and engagement would benefit in that context relative to a fixed mindset culture. But a second complementary hypothesis might be this. We thought that maybe mindset culture might have even stronger effects for students who belong to groups that are negatively stereotyped in this culture regarding intelligence and ability. So in the American context, it would be Black, Latinx, and Native students, as well as first-generation college students, low-income students, and women in STEM contexts. Why might this be? Well, we have to take this from the student perspective, that when faculty are perceived by students to endorse fixed mindset beliefs, so for example, much of this work that I've done over the last 10 years has been in STEM context, science, technology, engineering, and math, and funded by the National Science Foundation that really cares about those fields. And so from a student perspective, they might think this professor thinks that what's required to do well here, maybe it's spatial rotation, maybe it's computational skills and abilities. Those things are relatively fixed. They can't be changed. You either have them or you don't. We think students then say, well, who's supposed to have it, right? We think students will draw from cultural stereotypes in society to say, oh, this professor thinks it's these kinds of students, often white and sometimes Asian men, more so than Black, Latinx, and Native students and women in STEM, because according to our cultural stereotypes, these are the students, quote unquote, naturally gifted in these STEM abilities. But if instead a student thinks that their professor endorses the growth mindset around students' STEM abilities, they think the professor thinks that abilities are malleable, they're potential that can improve with effort and learning. Here we think that students will infer then that all students, regardless of their identity, background, or group, as long as they're engaging in those growth-minded strategies of putting in effort and adopting new strategies when they are challenged, that they can be successful in these classes. So from a theoretical perspective, we put forward this idea that perceiving a STEM professor as endorsing these fixed mindset beliefs might create a context of stereotype threat, putting certain students from these groups at risk of confirming these negative stereotypes about their intellectual ability and talents. How would we know that these fixed faculty mindset cultures are creating a context of stereotype threat? Well, we should expect to see the same kind of effects of stereotype threat as we see in the literature, such that underrepresented racial and ethnic minority students should underperform in these contexts relative to their white and Asian counterparts, but more so when faculty endorse more of these fixed mindset beliefs and less so when faculty endorse more growth mindset beliefs. So we conducted a study to figure out whether this was the case. We invited an entire institution's STEM faculty to participate, and we got everybody to participate. This institution had 150 STEM faculty. We asked them to self-report their mindset beliefs about student ability. And then what we did is longitudinally, we gathered their course data across 7 semesters That meant these 150 faculty, we teach a lot in the STEM fields, 602 courses reaching over 15,000 students. And we wanted to understand how faculty's mindset actually might influence students' performance in their classes, in that particular faculty member's classes. And what did we find? Well, consistent with our first hypothesis, we found a main effect of faculty mindset, meaning that students generally, on average, performed worse in courses there taught by faculty who self-reported more fixed mindset beliefs, and better in the classrooms of faculty who self-reported more growth mindset beliefs. But also consistent with that second hypothesis, we found that the racialized outcome gap here, this is end of the course grade in GPA points in that professor's class, we found that racialized outcome gap was twice as large in courses taught by faculty who self-report more fixed mindset beliefs. Now, this kind of racialized achievement gap, outcome gap, is something that we pretty consistently see, unfortunately, in many STEM environments. And as a researcher who's been studying equity in STEM context, this is something I'm pretty used to seeing about the size of an achievement gap. So what was really interesting to me, and a different way to look at the interaction, of course, is to say, what's going on here, right? The racialized outcome gap was halved in courses taught by faculty who self-reported more growth mindset beliefs. So the question becomes, what are these faculty doing differently to change the gap, right, in these contexts? So of course we asked, what's it like to be a student in these fixed and growth mindseted classrooms? And so what we did was we gathered the course evaluations for those 602 courses. And students tell us a little bit about their experience in these course evaluations. What we found was that students reported being more motivated to do their best work when their instructor self-reported more growth compared to fixed mindseted beliefs. They also told us a little bit about what faculty were doing in the class. They said that faculty who endorsed more growth-minded beliefs were more likely to emphasize learning and development. And if you looked at the comments, it looked like things like, you know, here's the material we are learning today. Here's how it builds on what we've learned in weeks 1, 2, and 3 of this course, right? Really making that growth and knowledge and the way that knowledge builds in the class tangible and transparent for students. Students were more likely to recommend the course when it was with a growth-minded compared to fixed-minded instructor. And some places where we didn't see an effect was, you know, compared to other courses, how much time did this course take? And we had another question around rigor, and perceived rigor was similar as well. So what's it like to be a student in these classes? We see that growth-minded instructors seem to emphasize learning and development more. They motivate students to do their best work. And yet these classes, according to students, are equally time-intensive and rigorous. But we wanted to learn more. Notice here, we didn't actually get to talk to the students directly or get to have any direct measurements besides their student evaluation, their course evaluations. And so we conducted another study in actual college classrooms with these wonderful collaborators. All of these 4 were postdocs here at IU with me, and then faculty collaborators. All 3 have a job. Doreen here on the faculty at Indiana, our good luck and good fortune. So we wanted to ask in this study, do perceptions of STEM faculty's mindsets actually influence their experiences in their real college courses? And to do this, we engaged in an experience sampling method. We recruited over 1,000 first and second year college students that were enrolled in more than 50 STEM courses across 4 universities. And what we did was we asked students, given their course schedule for a term, for each term, tell us who your instructor is, or tell us who the TA is in your lab courses, and then tell us a little bit about what you think they believe around students' ability. So we ask questions like, the professor or TA in this class seems to believe that some students have a certain amount of intelligence, and they can't really do much to change it. That's sort of a classic Dweckian mindset question. We asked them to report this for each one of their STEM instructors. And then we created an app. And we measured student experience in their classes in the moment. Immediately following their classes, they got a ping on their cell phone, and they were asked to complete very short surveys. that measured their what we call psychological vulnerability in that class. It included things like their negative affect and feelings, their sense of belonging, evaluative concerns, or feeling like an imposter in the classroom. We then collected altogether over 7,000 surveys, and we conducted multi-level modeling. These are students nested within classrooms, nested within universities. And I'm going to show you the process model results of what we found here. What we found was that when students perceive their STEM instructor to endorse more fixed mindset beliefs, it increases students' psychological vulnerability in that class. It lowers their sense of belonging. It increases their evaluative concerns. They are more concerned about being an imposter, and they show more negative affect in those classes. And why would we care about these psychological consequences, right? If you're not in psychology, you might say, oh, that's so soft. Like, why would I even care about that? But what we know is that these psychological experiences in the moment in our learning environments predict really important things that we do care about in society. It actually influences the degree to which students are engaged in their coursework, how much self-reported effort they put in, also their attendance in the class, as well as their dropout intentions across the term. It also lowers their interest in STEM, not just in this particular professor's class. So if this is a chemistry 101 class, it doesn't just reduce my interest in this particular class, but it also reduces my interest in chemistry as a discipline as a whole, right? Making it less likely that I will actually go down course paths to actually create and complete STEM majors. And then finally, replicating the previous study, we found that perceiving one's faculty to endorse more fixed mindset beliefs also lowered course performance in STEM classes through the link of these psychological experiences in those classes. So of course, the question is, well, what are we doing as faculty, right? That's actually communicating our mindset beliefs to students. What are instructors saying and doing that are doing this? And how can we use that to actually intervene to create more inclusive cultures of growth? So to answer this question, to start answering this question, my former student, Katie Kroper, and an honor student here at IU, Audrey Fried, and myself conducted a study using a social cognitive method called mouse tracking. And it's as fun as it sounds. And we're looking at how faculty communicate these faculty mindset beliefs. So what happened in the study, students were actually taught about the fixed and growth mindset, so we can be sure everyone is on the same page as to what the fixed and growth mindset is. And then, unfortunately for these students, they categorized 119 behaviors and statements as either relatively more growth-minded or relatively more fixed-minded. And where did these 119 behaviors and statements come from? We surveyed the literature in mindset, but then we had those 65 classrooms, and we knew what the faculty's self-reported mindsets were in those classrooms. And so we were able to also look at actual behavior and statements that came from faculty when they endorsed more fixed or growth mindset beliefs. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in practice to participate in a social psychology study engaged in mouse tracking. So students would come to the lab and they would sit in front of the computer, and they would start to see, after learning about mindset, several of these behaviors coming in a random order. And so they might see the professors offering additional practice problems, and they need to move the mouse, thus mouse tracking, to either the fixed or the growth mindset box. Now, if they move the mouse in this way, sort of directly related, quickly related to growth mindset, it means that students are relatively have very little uncertainty. They're relatively certain about their categorization. This is easy for them to categorize. But mouse tracking also allows us to look at when the pattern looks like this, revealing a little bit more uncertainty. This is a little bit more difficult for students to categorize. Or like this, which is called X flips, much more uncertainty, very difficult to categorize. And across students then, we can see how students consensually, right, together, think of some cues as more fixed and some as more growth. So what did we find? Well, we pre-registered all 119 of those behaviors and statements as what we thought students would categorize them as, more fixed, more growth, or maybe a little bit uncertain. And this basically just shows that we kind of know what we're doing. That according to our predictions, students were in relatively strong agreement with those pre-registered predictions. So what were these cues? What were faculty saying and doing that are consensually categorized by students as more fixed or growth? Let's look at the growth cues first. So growth mindset cues were things like, this faculty member tries different ways of explaining the course material to ensure all students understand. And the bold here is really added for our own benefit here in the audience, rather than it wasn't bolded for students when they saw the cues. Another one is that the faculty member encourages students to email questions so they can improve their understanding of the material. And a third, to struggling students, the professor says, listen, mistakes are just opportunities to learn. What are some of the fixed mindset cues? Well, when a faculty member encourages struggling students to just drop the course, we might mean to do that for many reasons, but students really perceive more fixed mindset beliefs when we do so. At the start of the term, when the professor says, listen, not all students are going to be capable of doing well in my class, it's another fixed mindset cue. And when faculty don't hold regular office hours because they believe extra time is not going to do much to help students, it's another cue. And finally, to struggling students, the professor might say, oh, that's okay. You're just not a math person, right? They might mean it in sort of a warm, comforting way, but students really see that faculty then believe some students have it and some students don't. And maybe this faculty member thinks, I don't have that. So the study takeaways here were that messages that prioritize grades and suggest that intellectual ability is relatively fixed and static are more often categorized as fixed. Messages that prioritize student learning and suggest ability is something that can be improved are more likely to be categorized as growth-minded. And when faculty provide the reasons for why they say or do the things they do, the messages were much easier for students to categorize. So for example, we put in the mix some cues like this. The professor tries different ways of explaining the course material. Some students saw just that. Others saw put different ways to explain the material to ensure that all students understand. When we provide the reasons for why we are saying and doing the things we do, it's much more easy for students to categorize and to think about what our beliefs are in the moment. So that kind of is consistent with some of the other work in education around transparency for learning, right? TILT methodologies. Other takeaways from this study, we actually found 4 categories of behavior that consistently indicated to students that faculty had more of a growth mindset. So when instructors suggest or explicitly communicate everyone can learn, when we offer more opportunities for practice and feedback as a regular basis within our courses, when we respond to struggling students with additional support and attention, and when we explicitly place value on students learning across the term, these are all behaviors that students perceive as indicating more growth mindset beliefs from our part as faculty. So we wanted to look at this more causally. And we've done many experiments, both in the lab and in the field. But this is one set of experiments that I wanted to show about how we know faculty mindset might actually cause some of these outcomes in classroom settings. And in particular, we wanted to look beyond race. So we also wanted to generalize to gender in science, technology, and engineering and math contexts. So in this set of studies conducted with my students, and one of the studies is part of a honors thesis here, we were able to ask whether faculty mindset actually shapes women's experience of threat in their STEM courses. One of the experiments in this set of studies included over 200 undergraduate students. And we told students that we were partnering with the math department at this university to better understand how students perceive courses. They were going to be asked to review a syllabus, and in this case, it was a Calculus 2 course syllabus, and to tell us a little bit about what they would think about the course and how they then would, their interest in taking the course, their perception of the instructor. And then after that, they would actually take a placement test. Just as in many calculus courses, students have to sit for a placement exam. So they would take a placement exam, and we were going to test the placement exam to get a sense of how it actually, benefited students and gave the instructor what they needed to move forward with selecting students. So because we are tricky social psychologists, embedded the mindset language within those syllabi. So students were either randomly assigned to read a more growth-minded syllabus or a more fixed-minded syllabus. And to do this, that honor student that I highlighted before gathered over 600 calculus syllabi from across the country. And we analyzed and recoded the cues, the behaviors, the language that communicated more fixed or growth mindset language from our perspective as researchers and from the previous cue study. And then we created these fixed and growth mindset syllabi to reflect some of those cues. Let me show you what I mean here. Students who were randomly assigned to the fixed mindset syllabus might see something about this with regard to the attendance policy. Note that the attendance policy is actually the same. The instructor does not take attendance in the course in either the fixed or the growth mindset classroom, but they don't do it for different reasons, right? In one case, it's because weaker students, will attend every lecture, and some students are going to do well without attending the class. I'm not going to penalize students and make them come to class if they don't want to come to class. Versus all students attend every lecture and discussion, right? They should. And all students are going to learn something new. Attending class is the best way to do that, right? To improve your learning and your skills. So again, the same policy, not taking attendance, but for different reasons. And again, same policy when it comes to resources. The math department's going to offer help sessions for students enrolled in this class. However, in the fixed syllabus, and this comes directly from syllabi in calculus from around this country, smart students who are gifted are probably not going to need these resources, versus all students should make use of these resources, as everyone can improve their learning and challenge themselves by coming to the help session. So we wanted to measure some of the outcomes related to our theory of stereotype threat. Remember that these fixed mindset cultures in classrooms might create a context of stereotype threat where students are worried about being negatively stereotyped regarding their identities in those classes. So in these experiments, we measured students' perceptions of the likelihood that the instructor would endorse some of these gender stereotypes. So face valid items, I think the professor in this class would endorse more gender stereotypes. We also measured belonging. If you were a student in this class, how much would you feel like you fit in? And then of course, we looked at their actual performance on this placement test, which consisted of 30 difficult GRE math problems. What did we find? Well, first, this is the perceived gender stereotyping outcome. And what you can see here is a gender gap when students read the fixed mindset syllabus. Women expected this professor to engage in more gender stereotyping than when the instructor had more than men did, actually, in that context. And you can see there's a whopping difference between the fixed mindset, right, syllabus and the growth mindset syllabus here. And you can see that that gendered gap in the perception of potential gender stereotyping also goes away, such that men and women both perceive much less gender stereotyping as likely on the part of the professor when they communicate a growth mindset through their syllabus. Here's anticipated belonging. We see a gendered belonging gap in this context where the professor endorses more of a fixed mindset through the syllabus. Men feel like they belong in these math classes more than women do. And you can see that when the faculty member endorses more of a growth mindset through their syllabus, this pattern reverses. And everybody feels like they belong more in these classes than in the fixed mindset syllabus class. And what happens to performance? Well, we see sort of this replicable gender achievement gap on this GRE test, highly significant, such that men outperform women on the GRE questions as they're taking this quote unquote placement exam for this course. And we don't close the gap in the growth mindset syllabus course, but we do reduce it by 60%, which is a highly significant difference here in terms of the reduction of the gender achievement gap. Men still perform a bit better on the GRE questions than do women, but the gap between them is significantly reduced. And when it comes to looking at process, we see, similar to our theory, that when students perceive that the instructor endorses more fixed mindset beliefs through their syllabus, this increases students' perceptions that the faculty member is likely to engage in gender stereotyping, which then reduces students' sense of belonging. And when you feel as though you belong in the class, it actually predicts positive performance, right? So we want students to feel that they belong so that their performance can be raised. And this effect, this pattern of effect is significant for women but not significant for men. So women in particular, when they perceive the fixed mindset among their faculty members, believe that faculty are more likely to engage in gender stereotyping, which reduces their belonging and affects their performance. So this study sort of is one of many we've conducted to sort of get you to see how we establish these causal links between these faculty mindset cues and student outcomes. And what we find is that faculty's fixed mindset messages are going to be threatening for everyone, but particularly important for women's performance in these contexts. And so we want to know, do these findings actually translate to the real world, right? Are we actually going to see similar levels of threat in STEM courses when they're taught by more fixed mindset faculty? And do students' perceptions of these faculty mindsets predict their grades in their courses, particularly for women? And so we did a field experiment where we had over 800 undergrad students across 46 STEM courses, and they took a survey at the beginning and end of the term. We again asked students about their perceptions of their faculty members' mindset, and this time we co-vary or control for a couple of different factors that are really important in mindset work. Students' personal mindset beliefs. So what do they believe about intelligence and ability over and above what they think their faculty member believes about intelligence and ability? And then also warmth, because we don't want it to be that just growth-minded instructors are just warmer maybe or kinder, right? We're going to control for that so that it's really these perceptions of their mindset beliefs and not these other outcomes that are leading to the results that we may find. Similar to the experiment, we measured now in people's real classes, their perceptions that the faculty member endorses gender stereotyping, now my real professor, my sense of belonging in that class, and also course grade at the end of the term. What did we find? Consistent with the previous studies, again, we found that students now in their real classes, when they think that their faculty member has more fixed mindset beliefs, they expect that professor to engage in more gender stereotyping than when the faculty member is perceived to endorse more growth mindseted beliefs. And when it comes to belonging, again, we find that students expect to feel as though they belong. In this case, it's actual belonging in their actual courses. They belong more in courses when they perceive their instructor to endorse more growth mindset beliefs than these fixed mindset beliefs. And replicating the effect in their actual STEM course grades, we find that the gender achievement gap is significant at the end of the term when students perceive their faculty member to endorse more fixed mindset beliefs. And that gendered effect goes to non-significance in classrooms where students perceive their faculty to endorse more growth-minded beliefs. And again, we replicated the moderated mediation analysis where we found that faculty's mindset beliefs affect the gender stereotyping that they perceive going on in the classroom, which affects their belonging, which affects their course grade. But again, this pattern was more significant for women and highly significant for women, but not so for men. So what do we take away from this? Well, we take away that when learning environments communicate that instructors and institutions have more of a growth mindset about intelligence, students feel supported. They feel as though they might fit in better in the college community. They're more likely to trust people at the institution. They're less worried about being treated as a stereotype, and they perform better. So what can institutions do? This has been really the project that has been consuming our lab and our collaborators for the last 3 years. We say address the mindset culture. So I want to talk to you now about a huge project that we are just wrapping up, and I can show you some of our early results here, called the Student Experience Project that really aimed to help institutions and faculty address the mindset culture in their own institutions and classrooms. So our theory of change for this intervention was that, listen, we think students are going to be more engaged and their learning outcomes are going to be improved when their instructors create more of a growth mindset culture in their classroom. That students, that growth mindset cultures are going to increase students' experiences with learning. That included many of the experiences I showed you before: imposter feelings, belonging, trust in the environment. And this is going to then impact students' performance and their retention across terms in these classroom environments. So we engaged in a huge project. It involved the organization I co-founded, and we have people from here today, the College Transition Collaborative, This organization that sort of really focuses on measurement in education, USU and APLU, Education Council, and Shift Results, which helps us think about continuous improvement as a rigorous design to be able to analyze these data over time and to be able to make some kind of inferences from the data we collect. Now, what we did was we invited universities from the USU APLU schools to apply to be part of this project. And we selected 6 campuses and recruited their STEM faculty from those classes to take part in the Student Experience Project as our first cohort of schools. But we had so many schools that were interested. We also had a peer learning network of 12 universities that took our practices that we at the College Transition Collaborative created and that were then informed by our cohort and used those practices. And we wanted to know, with no help at all from us, could other faculty and other institutions take up our work, and would they see a benefit in their context as well? So for the Student Experience Project, the SEP as we call it, this is what faculty participation looked like across the years and the semesters. We engaged in planning phases across the spring and summer of 2020. This included a small group of faculty at each university and university leaders at the student success level, associate vice provosts and such, and vice provosts of student learning and success. In the fall of 2020, by the way, this all happened during COVID, right? And we gave our institutions a chance to sort of say, well, it's COVID time. Like, we're all going online. There's too much going on. And our institutions, we picked the right ones, it seems, right? They've said, absolutely not. We need this more than ever. And so we went forward with them. And in the fall of 2020, we recruited 101 faculty at these 6 universities, and they taught over 12,000 students in that term. And in the following terms, we've been scaling up ever since. In 2021, we had 200 faculty at 6 universities, doubling the number of students in that cohort as well. So how did we do this project? First, we started with these 6 universities. We did focus groups and surveys and analysis of their historical institutional records to identify similar gaps and opportunities for improvement across the cohort. We wanted to know what's similar across these 6 universities that we could work together to actually ameliorate in these contexts as a cohort. And it's not going to surprise you that students from structurally disadvantaged racial groups and those with high financial stress were 2 to 3 times more likely to experience identity threat than were their peers. And they were much more likely to have higher DF or to withdraw, DFW rates in these Gateway STEM courses. So we decided to narrow in on Gateway STEM as the areas that we'd be working on in the Student Experience Project. For each of these universities, we created comprehensive reports that really demonstrated the need for this institution to participate, and they got institutional buy-in from the highest levels, president and provost of these universities. And individuals who received these reports sort of were very happy and helpful. And this actually created a lot of credibility on the ground for faculty then to be able to engage in this work, not just as on the side, but as part of their main contribution in the classroom as they taught. And what did we do here to actually measure student experience? Well, we created what we call the Student Experience Index, the SEI, that consists of 5 core components that from our own research and from the literature are linked to academic engagement and persistence, and that really drive more equitable outcomes in higher education. That's institutional growth mindset, as we've talked about, a sense of belonging or the feeling that maybe I belong, maybe I don't belong, belonging and certainty, identity safety, feeling as though you trust and are going to be treated fairly by faculty members, and self-efficacy in the class. So all together, this is the Student Experience Index. And faculty received data in their own class across the term. They got to see what student experience was like in the moment as they were teaching, and then they were given practices to drive more equitable student experience across the term, seeing whether or not they were making progress with some of the apps that we developed. And so this project took what we call a continuous improvement design. Rather than a RCT or randomized control trial, we actually wanted to learn along the way so that faculty engaged in planning what changes they were going to implement in their classes as they were teaching their regular chemistry or their regular biology. We didn't ask them to do anything different than what they were normally doing, just sort of tweaking the first day of class lecture or the syllabus language or the way they described assignments, or when they gave feedback to students in class, right? So they would plan what they were going to do, engage in that behavior, study it with their own data, and then act again. The benefit of this kind of design is that we can then learn what are faculty doing and saying across time. And when faculty, we can understand what are the most popular practices. And when faculty engage in, say, practice 2, 3, and 4, does that have a different impact than if they engage in 1, 3, and 5, right? We can sort of understand that over time. So our priority at the Student Experience Project was really whole institutional transformation. From faculty's perspective, they got a classroom change library with some of these evidence-based practices, and I'll show you what those look like in a minute. We measured student experience with a program called Copilot Ascend. We had institutional cross-group working groups that consisted of students and their leaders engaged in the systemic change and sharing what worked and didn't work across those 6 universities that were part of our cohort. And students' voice was really important to us and put in at every stage. We got feedback on the practices, feedback on measures, and feedback within the institutional groups. And so from faculty's perspective, we elevated the student experience by students taking these short surveys immediately in class. Faculty reviewed their feedback. They then went and learned the relevant practices from our practice library, and then they were able to track their improvement over time. So the practices library exists online. We have made it freely available with all of the practices that we created for this project, and they're available for people to use. If you're interested, you can go to our website at College Transition Collaborative. We also include some online skill building workshops where we actually helped faculty think through how they might actually engage in these practice changes and attended by many faculty in our cohort. What do these resources look like? A lot of them look like downloadable PDFs, where an example construct is explained in sort of everyday language, particularly for STEM faculty who don't really know what these psychological constructs look like or sound like. We tell them what the key ingredients are for implementing that change, and then we give them some examples about how you might say this. What does it look and sound like? And then what doesn't it look like and sound like, to be sure that people are doing this with fidelity. And then almost always we have checklists so that faculty can sort of evaluate the changes that they want to make according to what the research suggests are going to make it most potent in the classroom. Faculty then get their data across the term, and it's broken up and disaggregated by student group. So for example, in this example, faculty can see if they have a racial ethnic gap in their students perceiving them to have more of a growth mindset culture in their class, or a gender gap, or a gap between students who are more or less financially stressed. Then over time, as faculty are engaging in this practice work, they can sort of see for themselves whether or not student experience is actually increasing or decreasing or staying the same across the term for each one of these psychological experiences we were measuring, and then for the index as a whole. What did we find? We found that every college's pilot team significantly increased students' experiences, particularly their sense of belonging and their identity safety in their courses. So that again was 100 instructors. We saw increases across the cohort. We found that some instructors were very good at doing this, right? Some instructors increased Black and Latinx students' sense of belonging and identity safety by over 20 percentage points. We call these positive deviant instructors, right? Instructors who are really sort of good at pushing student experience. And what we did as a research team was then we sort of talked to those individuals. What kind of practice did you use? What did you say? What did you do? And we elevated that practice so in the next cycle, faculty could take advantage and learn across the cohort from those individuals. And then to the point of institutional transformation, we found that these teams were actually extending this learning beyond the classroom setting. So to other areas of campus change, really measuring what student experience is if I give version A of early alerts or version B, or when it comes to designing our physical or our virtual space, right? Which one actually makes students feel as though they belong, like they're not an imposter, right? That they have a lot of efficacy or that they can trust this institution or the classroom. Also academic probation messaging. Using these automated tools we created, they could test at their own institution various messages with randomized control trials to see which kinds of messages actually increase student experience and then the downstream outcomes like coming off probation, for example. We also found, of course, that students who were in these classrooms where their faculty member was engaged in the student experience project did increase their positive experiences in those classrooms across time. So this is from the first week of class to midterms. We also found that as students' experiences in those classes increased, so too did the likelihood of them getting an A or B in the class. And the likelihood of them getting a D, F, or W decreased significantly as students' experiences increased as their professor engaged in these change behaviors. And to the point of equity, we found that we were reducing inequities in students' experiences and grades in these classrooms. When students experienced these positive experiences in class, they were more likely to get an A or B in their course. And this was true for structurally disadvantaged racial and ethnic group students, women in these STEM classes, highly financially stressed students, transfer students, and then also first generation college students. What's nice about this project is that everything is digital and scalable. This is a project that really could, I think, transform higher education. We have these initial diagnostic tools and reports that are available and scripted online, practice libraries and online faculty trainings, continuous classroom-based assessments, and faculty in the moment reports, and then these automated tools to assess other language and messaging across a campus context. What are we doing now? Well, we're analyzing faculty's historical data and institutions course-matched classrooms to see the extent to which when faculty engage in this work versus when the same faculty teaching the same class did not engage in this work, do we see differences? We've actually already done those analyses. They just came back and we are seeing effects there. We're also going ahead and doing the randomized control trial, right? In a conversation I had with Bill Gates, actually at the beginning of this year, some of this work was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they said, well, what do you know about causal impacts here? And he said, you got to do that RCT. So the Rakes Foundation and others are going to help us figure out the RCT in this context and perhaps in community colleges as well, where we're going to engage with faculty across universities to randomly assign them to these practices and look at the impact on student outcomes. We're also conducting experiments with each tool to pinpoint efficacy. What is the sort of increased value of each individual practice married on top of each other? And then again, as I said, we're extending into community colleges where more underrepresented students actually receive their college education than in four-year institutions. So what are growth mindset cultures, right? Growth mindset cultures are those that communicate that intelligence and ability is something that can be developed and expanded through good strategies, persistence, asking questions, and seeking help. And what we know is that instructors who communicate this growth mindset of ability are going to increase students' motivation and engagement, reduce their psychological vulnerability in class, increase their belonging and performance, and it helps create more equitable learning environments. And as we think about mindset scholarship and where that work needs to go in the future, we know that mindset culture has to be part of this new Mount Everest, right? This work gives us some insight into how teachers and instructors, what they might be saying and doing, but there's much more work that's left to be done. We need to know whether faculty can do this sustainably over time and with high fidelity. Do faculty beliefs, this is a basic question of social cognition, do beliefs need to change in addition to behavior? And then of course, how do faculty and students' mindsets interact? Do students come on board as faculty create more of a growth mindset culture? Do their beliefs actually change more towards the growth mindset as well in those particular contexts? We will discover that in our future work. And of course, we need community to scale it. So I invite anyone interested in partnering with us to do so, because we are always looking for new partners in educational contexts. So I'm going to end today with 3 questions that really drive my work and the work of my students in my lab. What if we created environments that minimize threats to belonging and potential? What if we reduced interpersonal and institutional signs that you're not smart or that you can't cut it? What would our inequalities look like then? How much human potential could be unleashed? I believe it's a lot, and I am dedicated to the journey of discovering this going forward. And I want to thank my team of graduate students and postdocs who've contributed to this work over time, my PBS colleagues from whom I gather much inspiration and motivation, the hundreds of IU undergraduate research assistants and the honors students who you see we publish with in this work, and the Equity Accelerator at Indiana University's team, many of whom are here today. Couldn't do this work without all of you. I want to thank you for listening. So thanks. Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you those people on Zoom. Really appreciate everyone's attention. I think we're going to open it now to questions and answers. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll answer some questions.
My name is Ava Clouden. When you have a question, raise your hand. I'll bring you the mic and you can talk into it while I hold it.
That's a question. There's one right over here in Van Kooten. Is it a hard one?
Oh, no, it's 3 questions for maximum
All right,
efficiency.
3 questions.
So the SEI index, is that via answering survey questions on your cell phone?
That's correct. That's right. Basically, they could answer the questions either on their cell phone or on their computer, or whatever device they have in class. And so students were sort of, oftentimes faculty would sort of leave a few minutes after class for students to do that when they were in their cycles of data collection in the course.
And then do you use systems like Canvas for other parts of it? Or is it all everything through the cell phone? Like the
We did-
automated piece of it must be through some system.
Yep, it's through a separate system, and then faculty get their own data and reports generated. It's basically they go to a website and then they can see their own data and their inequities across these various aspects of the SEI are revealed to them. And then right next to that, they sort of see, okay, what should I do about this? If I have a particular problem with belonging, or if I have a particular problem with identity, safety, or trust, what are the strategies used for trust or for belonging or for identity safety that are in particular that I could go to? That takes them directly to the practice library and some of these workshops. And then they can sort of think, okay, I'm going to take this practice, I'm going to try it next. Then I'll run another cycle of student experience to see if I've closed those gaps or improved student experience for those students.
Okay, thanks. And then the super obvious one. So we're not in that 6 university.
No,
that I take we're not in the 12 either. So-
no. And we
This
are
is-
ready to do it here at IU
Okay, good.
with the Equity Accelerator.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. There's a question behind and then over here. Jillian.
Thank you. Hi, Mary. Thank you
Hi.
for this excellent work. I'm Jillian Kinsey with the National Survey of Student Engagement, and I'm really excited to hear about the whole development and the arc of this work and excited for what's coming next. I really appreciate your focus on faculty and students in those courses, and I really see a lot of value in that particular point of view and that focus.
Mhm.
And as you know, as part of our national survey project, we've been conducting studies of institutions for the past 20 years now at the institution level and have been measuring things like sense of belonging more recently and are seeing really institutional cultures.
Yes.
So I wonder if you might comment on if you're seeing, the mention of 6 institutions is interesting because I know a little bit about those 6 institutions and can say, my sense is those 6 have more of an orientation to student success as an institution as well. And I wonder if you can comment on that interaction, or do you imagine that there is a student success mindset culture at an institution level, not just at a faculty level or a student level? Is there such a thing, and
Yes.
what might we do about it?
Great question. So there is something called institutional mindset. And my postdoc, Wen, here in the audience, is studying this. And so I will introduce you afterward. But for everybody here, institutional mindset is really this idea. Students perceive it as the institution as a whole endorses more of these fixed or growth mindset cultures. We've been studying how this is actually communicated at the institutional level. We see things like at the very beginning of the term commencement or convocation addresses. where high-ranking individuals at the university that sort of speak as the leaders of the organization or as the institution really tell us a little bit about, who are our students. What we found in some of our studies is when provosts or presidents kind of give these addresses and they say things like, we have 4 students who have already authored books. We have 5 who have sought patents. We have had, these 3 people were Olympians this last year, right? We actually see that creates more of this fixed mindset. You either have it or you don't. You're brilliant or you're not, right? And what happens to the students, the vast majority who haven't achieved at those levels, they oftentimes start to wonder whether or not they belong in these contexts, right? Actually reduces belonging, particularly for students from structurally disadvantaged groups who haven't had those opportunities yet, right, to engage in some of those achievements. And so that's one example of how this is communicated. We also know that some of these official messages by the university that are sent around, for example, early alerts or probation messages, these are institutional messages that sort of communicate the institution's mindset as a whole. And so WEN is finding similar effects in our data set. We did an analysis of, we had 22 universities across time, and we want to explore with NESI and with others, many more institutions looking at, we've done web scraping of institutions, public facing words, their missions, their websites, and sort of created these natural language learning models where we actually can sort of say, okay, this is more of a fixed mindset kind of message. This is more of a growth mindset message. And we see that impacts the achievement gaps at those universities. Similarly, in corporate settings, we have actually looked at mission statements of the Fortune 500 with web scraping tools and using these sorts of algorithms to identify fixed and growth-minded, more fixed or more growth-minded organizations. And that also predicts the extent to which their culture is one that is perceived by employees in those organizations as inclusive, and also some of the achievement gaps that you see in evaluations and sort of performance and getting promotions within the organization. So there is institutional mindset. It's something we really want to focus on, that we'll be focusing on at the Equity Accelerator. Rich.
Yeah, fantastic work. I have 2 questions, one sort of silly and quirky and one serious.
Okay.
The quirky one is, I'm trying to imagine how you do a randomized control trial. Do you have some faculty agree to use a fixed mindset even though they know it's bad?
Yep. So no. We do not do that. Instead, we measure faculty's mindset, right? And they engage in either a waitlist control kind of RCT, where they engage in their practices as normal, and we study those practices. And then we have other faculty randomized to the treatment practices. And then we study that over time. And then we can see how those who don't get practices versus who do get practices and engage with them, how that differs over time. So we actually don't have the fixed mindset culture per se, except when faculty self-report fixed mindset, which in STEM contexts, they do quite a bit. And so that is the comparison, is sort of practice as usual versus enhanced student experience practices, and then looking at the impact of that over time. The other benefit of this is that we can also look at same faculty member, same courses, previous term, right, where they weren't engaged in these practices, and then so much. So that's sort of like a within subjects analysis we can also do.
Okay, a more serious question is something you didn't address, but you surely deal with. I would imagine that what's extremely important is the mindset of parents and friends.
Yes. Yes. So the mindset of parents and friends, this is really important. In her developmental work, Carol Dweck is both a social psychologist and a developmental psychologist. And some of the work she's published most recently actually looked at parents and their interactions with small children, and had a couple of hypotheses about this. One, they gathered parents' self-reported mindset beliefs. Did parents endorse more of a fixed or more of a growth mindset on that continuum? And then they brought the parents and their kids into the lab, and they had the kid engage in basically unsolvable problems, right? These kids were going to be set up to fail, and they were going to be having to, and they know that the camera's there, the researchers are watching, and the parent's supposed to be sitting there while the kid engages in these tasks. And they weren't actually looking at anything with regard to the student per se, or the kid in these contexts. Instead, they were looking at how the parents interacted with the kid. Were the parents like, oh, get this right, come on, put this thing over there. This is how you solve it. Like really kind of engaged in this sort of do not fail, make me look good, right? We're going to engage in these. Or were they sort of, supportive of the challenges and the mistakes kid made? Said, well, that doesn't look like that worked. What are you going to try next? Let's think about, well, that didn't work either. Let's try something else, right? That kind of engagement. And what they found in that study was it wasn't parents' self-reported mindset beliefs. It was their behaviors on the ground. It was how they actually engaged with their child in these moments of failure and mistake making, right? That actually predicted their kids' mindset beliefs and their kids' ways in which they responded to those challenges over time. And so similar to what we see here, yes, faculty mindset beliefs do seem to matter, but even more so our behavior, what we say and do in the classroom, our policies, procedures, our interactions with students are really going to matter. So the data with parents is similar to the data here, suggesting that our policies and practices and interactions are going to be really important in these contexts. And we're also looking at the effect of peers, because culture is not just created by the most powerful, right? It can also be influenced by peers and how peers respond to the norms that faculty and teachers and others set in a classroom. And to that point, there was a study that we published actually just a few months ago in Psychological Science, where a direct-to-student mindset intervention was given in a nationally representative study of middle school students. And students around the nation received this mindset intervention, helping them sort of move toward their growth mindset, particularly in algebra and math, than the fixed mindset. And then what they discovered in our analysis, we discovered that the intervention actually only worked when the teacher endorsed more of a growth mindset or when peers endorsed more of a growth mindset, right? So that mindset culture really matters, whether it comes from faculty, whether it comes from peers, right? That mindset culture surrounding is really the key to whether or not these personal beliefs are taken up and actually have the impact on student performance that you might expect to see. So great questions about culture at different variables, different levels of analysis. Vice Provost.
Yeah, so Mary, this is really interesting. So my question has to do with the ability of the growth mindset to generate an insulative condition. So in other words, the more a student experiences the growth mindset, do they become more insulated from, say, a counter experience going forward? Does that build more confidence in them so that they can withstand a negative experience going forward? Or have you not been able to yet do a longitudinal study to understand that?
Yeah, it's a great question. You're basically asking a question of process here. And we have been able to look at some of this in various studies we've conducted. In some studies, we've actually found that students still experience sort of the same amount of challenges in their class. They still fail at the same rate in many ways, make the same kind of mistakes. We actually don't see differences at the very beginning of term in terms of students' experiences of these kinds of academic, or if we're looking socially, these social challenges that they might have. But instead, they're able to cope with them differently. They construe them not as something that's a threat to myself or to my belonging here, but instead it's an opportunity to figure out a different way. Now I'm going to join a club. Now I'm going to go to the office hours of the professor, right? Now I'm going to actually look for more resources or join a study group. They're more open and vigilant to opportunities to actually develop and grow in the face of those mistakes. So it doesn't reduce, especially at first, sort of the challenges students experience, but instead it changes their construal of them. And by changing their construal of them, they then are allowed to sort of use their motivation, right, to figure out different opportunities to grow and to develop and to get help, to seek help. Yes, so it insulates them from that. Question there, Aina.
First of all, thank you, Mary, for an illustrative lecture that was really, really informative. I have two questions. How does this mindset idea relate to what goes on in research labs and research culture?
Yes.
And secondly, partly related to that, how does it apply to those of us who come from other places, particularly where English is not our first language and we suddenly find ourselves thrown into a culture where we have to learn and function in and speak in an environment that's unfamiliar to us?
Great questions. Great questions. I'll take the first one first. So this is really the question of how this relates within research labs. And in a study published in Science, a group of researchers actually surveyed faculty across many Research One universities and many fields within those universities. And they asked faculty, what does it actually take to be successful in your field? And to what extent is what it takes actually brilliance and high levels of ability and talent, right? And so they looked at these brilliance beliefs that are very tuned and similar to sort of the fixed mindset beliefs of you either have it or you don't, right? You're either one of the stars or you're not, right? And to the extent, first of all, you can see the different fields lined up as to the ways in which these fields endorse these brilliance beliefs. Psychology is somewhere in the middle, but things like theoretical physics compared to applied physics, right? Much more of these brilliance beliefs needed. In the non-STEM fields and humanities, philosophy is a big brilliance field. There are others, right? Computer science is also seen as a brilliance field. And what these researchers did across the sciences and non-STEM fields, they then took the numbers from the National Science Foundation about the number of women and the number of people of color who are going into PhDs in these fields. So back to research labs and training. And what they found was a relationship between these, and it was a linear relationship, and the linear relationship sort of replicated across STEM and non-STEM. It was stronger in STEM because more brilliance beliefs are located within STEM fields. And what they found was that when, to the extent that a field by its faculty across the nation endorsed more brilliance beliefs, the less likely women and people of color were to pursue PhDs in those fields. Now, that's a correlational study. We don't know if that's because women and people of color are turned off by these ideas of brilliance, where they know they might be excluded based on these societal stereotypes. To your second question about English language learners, they might be say, well, I'm not even going to be perceived as smart and intelligent and brilliant, right? If I'm having to struggle, to actually communicate in this language that is not my home language. And so we don't know if it's because people are not attracted to these fields, or if because there's discrimination and stereotyping, that we have a prototype of who's brilliant a lot of times in these fields. And oftentimes that's white men, maybe Asian individuals, but less likely to be sort of Black, Native, Latino individuals, or people who might have disabilities, or people who have other forms of difference, right, that don't sort of match our brilliance prototype. And so our work kind of starts at that point, really offering a theory as to why individuals might not be included here, right? Not only the gender and racial stereotyping, but also these experiences of identity threat on the part of individuals as they think about what field really should I pursue? And where do I really want to spend my passion and engagement and ability? Where do I want to commit for my whole career? So yes, this applies in labs, this applies to graduate training, it applies to undergraduate training, and other researchers have taken up this idea and actually studied this in different research labs and found similar effects as what we find in classroom settings. Oh, Jim.
Thank you, Mary.
Yes, thank you.
So these fixed and growth beliefs apply to organizations, they apply to the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I assume they also apply to things like athletic teams.
They do.
And I wonder whether you've been asked. We seem to have in our men's basketball team a fixed notion that
Yeah.
either you can shoot threes or you can't, and we can't.
Right.
Either you can shoot free throws or you can't, and we can't. And honestly, the things that I read in the paper and the things I hear are really all about fixed
Talent. Yep.
fixed talent.
That's
And,
right.
so I'm just wondering whether you've been asked by ours or other athletic teams
Yes.
to
Yes.
weigh in.
We've worked with the San Francisco Giants. We've worked with several other professional teams. who are really interested in how this applies. There have been some teams, Kansas City, for example, has actually looked at this and measured mindset among individuals that they were recruiting. There's research on bought versus built teams. So bot teams are teams that sort of acquire just the star player, right? Wherever they can find them. Then they create teams, you know these teams, that are basically bot teams and look at how they're perceived and how they perform relative to built teams, teams that actually think about their abilities and talents as potentials and then work over time to develop those potentials and to put them in the right place that maximizes where people are in the moment with their talent and ability. And people really, not surprisingly, don't care for the bot teams as much as they care for the built teams. And then they also see performance differences, actually, that the built teams over time perform better than the bot teams. And it depends on the discipline, it depends on the particular sport. But overall, that's kind of been the finding. But yes, professional teams are really interested in this. And they're particularly interested in certain positions that they sort of already think as that you need to sort of grow your skills and abilities and to really mesh with the team dynamics in order to be able to perform well in those settings. So yes, and then there's also a difference in sports when it comes to teams versus individual sports, things like golf and those others that are sort of performed as an individual, much more, fixed mindset, theories and talent is important. There's been certain stars who have actually tried to embody more of the growth mindset more explicitly in their careers, where they've taken their game all the way down. Tiger Woods is famous for this, taking his game all the way down to the very basics and rebuilding it over time when he sort of had his first sort of comeback. But yes, this is a concept and construct that is highly relevant in the domain of sports. Thanks for that.
And there's time for one final question.
Okay, right here.
Thanks, Mary. It was a great presentation. Quick question, when your mention of middle schoolers, it reminded me that our lifelong learning starts very, very early. So my question is, how strong is the research in K through 12 that suggests this fixed or growth mindset starting at a very early age and moving through that lifespan of education?
Yeah, it's a great question. This mindset culture work has really just taken hold in the last 10 years. Previous to that, for 35 years, we really only thought about mindset as an individual difference. Like, is the student having more of a fixed or more of a growth mindset, as I mentioned at the beginning? But in the last few years, we've actually seen this mindset culture idea sort of take root in K-12. Right before COVID, for 4 summers, my colleagues and I developed a curriculum for K-12 instructors and created a summer school where K-12 instructors would come for a week, learn these practices, practice them with each other, get feedback on these various practices, and then institute them over the course of the fall term. We videotaped those teachers. We went in and assessed their students at the beginning of the term and at the end of the term. And then in the last few summers, we randomized faculty to sort of a waitlist control and then engaging in this curriculum. And we are seeing benefits for students, particularly those from structurally disadvantaged groups, low-income students, students of color, these types of students who don't speak English as their first language. These students are really benefiting more from growth mindset cultures in the K-12 environment where their instructor participated in these kinds of practices through the Summer Institute. So we do have some nice evidence in that. Great. Thank you all so much for coming. I so appreciate this. And I think we're going to have this closed out.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
So at this time, Provost Shrivastava and I would like to present Mary with the Distinguished Faculty Research Lecturer Award. The award consists of 3 components. The first one is a $5,000 prize that will be transferred directly into Mary's research account. Don't worry, the check's in the mail. And I'll double it if you take chemistry off your slides.
Never.
The second is this framed certificate acknowledging her tremendous accomplishments and the award. And then finally, we have this commemorative research coin that OVPR gives out only on very special occasions.
Congratulations. Congratulations, and thank you for all the great work you've done and for being here today to tell us about it.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you. Thank you, Beth. Thank you all.
So that concludes our program. I want to thank especially David Taylor, who always does an amazing job with his colleagues of putting together these wonderful events with such professional grace. I also want to thank all of you, both in person and online, for joining us here today. It's been a real pleasure to have you, and I want to wish you a wonderful rest of your day.